The night the fear seeped into the small Minnesota town of Red Willow felt like one of those nights that sticks to the air long after dawn comes. It was September 2001, the kind of early autumn evening where the wind carried a chill that didn't quite belong there yet, and the leaves rattled as if whispering warnings no one paid attention to. 21-year-old Marissa Klay, a nursing student known for her soft laugh and the way she always tucked her hair behind her ear when she got nervous, left her evening shift at the community clinic and started her walk home. She had done this walk hundreds of times, passing the narrow stretch of woods that separated the clinic from her apartment complex. It wasn't a dangerous route, just quieter than most. But something about that night felt different, even to people who remembered seeing her. They couldn't explain it, just a heaviness in the air, the kind that makes you glance over your shoulder even when you're not sure why. Marissa called her older sister Dana around 9:18 p.m., telling her she'd be home soon and that she planned to reheat leftover pasta before reviewing anatomy notes. Dana joked that Marissa needed to stop studying so much or she'd turn into a textbook. Marissa laughed, said she'd call when she got home, and tucked the phone into her coat pocket. That was the last time anyone heard her voice. Minutes later, residents living near the tree line reported hearing something. A sharp yelp, quick footsteps, then silence. Most convinced themselves it was an animal. Red Willow was not the kind of place where danger was expected, not the kind of place where a young woman vanished without even leaving a sound that people could confidently identify as human. But when Marissa didn't return home, didn't call, didn't show up for her early shift the next morning, the town's heartbeat shifted. Her disappearance turned Red Willow into a place frozen in worry. Volunteers fanned out across the woods with flashlights, calling her name with increasing desperation. Dogs traced her scent only halfway through the path before losing it, as if she had simply stepped off the earth and into some unseen space. At the clinic, nurses who adored her cried quietly between patients. At home, Dana called hospitals, friends, anyone who might have heard something. But there was nothing. No footprints. No torn clothing. No dropped belongings. It was as if the woods had swallowed her whole. And for a small town that had never dealt with anything like this, the fear settled deep. Detective Ryland Porter, only 4 years into his career back then, remembered the case vividly. He was the one who found Marissa's silver hair clip near the edge of the trail, a small, delicate piece she always wore, shaped like a folded leaf. Its hinge was damaged, suggesting it had been pulled or hit something. Ryland later admitted that holding that hair clip made him feel something he'd never felt before as an investigator, a connection that tugged at him every time he revisited the case. He vowed silently that he would find whoever had crossed paths with Marissa that night. But as days turned into weeks, and the initial surge of hope dissolved into a cold, hard void, even he struggled to understand how a student walking home on a familiar route could simply disappear without being found. When Marissa's body was discovered 18 days later, deep inside the woods in a hollow used mostly by hunters, grief hit Red Willow so powerfully that residents later described it as a crack in the town's foundation. She was found lying in a shallow bed of leaves, her coat torn, her hands scraped as if she had reached out desperately for anything to hold onto. The medical examiner determined she had been assaulted and killed the same night she vanished. But what chillingly stood out was a faint trace, skin cells found beneath one of her fingernails, a whisper of evidence so small it was almost missed. Back then, forensic technology was far more limited. Labs could test DNA profiles, but only if the database already contained the matching person. If it did not, the profile simply sat in the system, silent and useless, waiting for a match that might never come. The DNA sample in Marissa's case produced no matches, not in 2001, not in 2002, not in 2005. As years passed, the case grew colder, but the ache remained. The Klay family carried it heavily. Her mother kept Marissa's bedroom exactly as she left it, the note still taped to her mirror, the half-finished sketch on her desk of a willow tree. She had drawn it for an art elective and planned to color it when she had time. Dana visited the police station every few months, asking for updates even when she knew there would be none. Rylan, who grew older, more experienced, and eventually became lead detective, never let her memory fade. Every anniversary, he drove to the edge of the woods and stood quietly, listening to the wind as if expecting the trees to tell him something they hadn't told anyone 19 years earlier. Twists emerged over the years. A man arrested for another crime claimed he had information, only to retract everything once investigators realized he was lying for attention. A drifter who had been in the area around the same time was investigated intensely, but his DNA didn't match. Another suspect, a local known for unpredictable behavior, was questioned multiple times, but he had an alibi solid enough to keep him from being charged. The case became a tangle of wrong turns, dashed hopes, and perpetual questions. What made it more tormenting was that the DNA scrap from Marissa's fingernail was undeniably from her attacker, yet it sat in the system growing older without revealing itself. Everything changed in 2020, nearly 2 decades later, when advancements in genetic genealogy gained momentum across the country. The technique had already cracked numerous cold cases, cases once considered unsolvable. Detectives could now take a DNA sample from an unsolved crime and compare it against public genealogy databases to locate distant relatives of the suspect, building a family tree backwards to eventually identify the likely perpetrator. When Minnesota's Cold Case Division decided to reopen files most likely to benefit from new technology, Marissa's case was placed near the top. Rylan had been pushing for it for years, and this time, the science finally existed to meet his determination. For the first time since 2001, the case held breath again. The DNA sample was re-extracted, cleaned, re-evaluated, and sent to a partnered lab that specialized in advanced genealogical mapping. Weeks went by, marked by the kind of tense anticipation that made even routine sounds feel sharper. Rylan visited the lab almost every day, asking whether any new connections had surfaced. Lab analyst Aline Mercer, a calm and meticulous professional with a talent for piecing together family histories, charted hundreds of distant matches, slowly narrowing down potential lines. She described it later as trying to connect dots that weren't visible yet, only hinted at through faint shadows. Another twist came when a match unexpectedly linked to a family line that had no known connection to Red Willow. It was a rural family from North Dakota with a long, complicated history, multiple cousins, step-relatives, and estranged branches. Aline spent hours mapping them out until something strange emerged. One relative, a man named Calder, had spent a short period in Minnesota in the early 2000s. Not in Red Willow, but within miles of the area. His name didn't appear in any town record because he lived out of a camper van, drifting from one job site to another. He had never been arrested, never entered into the system, never left official footprints anywhere. He was, in many ways, a man who lived between cracks. When Rylan read Calder's name for the first time, something inside him shifted. He didn't want to get his hopes up. He had been shattered too many times before. But the more he looked through that family tree, the more one detail after another aligned eerily with Marissa's timeline. Calder had relatives within the genealogy database. Calder had been in the area at the right time. Calder was the only male descendant in that branch who matched the age range predicted by their genetic projections. And Calder had abruptly vanished after 2001, resurfacing only occasionally on work logs from odd construction jobs in neighboring states. The breakthrough came in 2021, when a distant cousin of Calder submitted new DNA data for a genealogy test, unknowingly providing the missing puzzle piece. The match strengthened their confidence. Calder was at least a first-cousin connection to the DNA found beneath Marissa's fingernail. Rylan felt adrenaline surge as he realized they weren't dealing with guesses anymore. They were dealing with someone who sat at the center of that family tree like a quiet shadow that had escaped notice for 19 years. The lab prepared the final genealogical chart, and the branches pointed unmistakably toward one man. Even before they confirmed it, Ryland felt it in his bones. The story was finally bending toward the truth. The next step was old-fashioned police work. They had to locate Calderon, a man who had lived his life like someone determined never to leave a trace. But no one escapes the past forever. Ryland and two agents from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension tracked him through employment records, old addresses, and abandoned mailboxes until they located him in northern Montana, living under a different surname but not illegally, just drifting, still tucked quietly into the edges of society as if hiding in plain sight. The team prepared to make contact, but before they did, they needed one final confirmation: a fresh DNA sample from Calder to compare against the 2001 profile. Without it, they risked confronting the wrong man. So they set up surveillance. Days passed. Calder walked to the same diner every morning, drank coffee alone, never spoke to anyone unless he had to. One afternoon, he tossed a used cigarette butt near a trash can outside. A small, careless gesture. But to investigators chasing him for 19 years, it was the moment the case shifted from hope to near certainty. Forensics rushed the sample. A line ran the comparison. The moment the pattern aligned, she froze, staring at the screen as if the numbers had shocked her. Then she called Ryland, her voice trembling. It was him. Calderon was the man Marissa fought in the dark. Ryland stood in silence after the call, his chest tight, his breath slow. For 19 years, the town had lived under a silent shadow. But now, finally, they had a name, a face, a man who could no longer blend into the edges of the world. And as the sun set that evening, casting long, golden streaks across the cold case unit's windows, Ryland whispered into the quiet room, "Marissa, we found him." The investigation had reached a point where every detective working that year in Minnesota seemed to know the name Tara Lundell, the 24-year-old daycare assistant whose gentle voice and calm smile still lived in the memories of the families she once helped. By the summer of 2001, her disappearance had already gone from strange to frightening, then from frightening to unbearably confusing. People in the small town of Baxter had watched deputies search along ditches, rivers, and abandoned cabins, yet nothing pointed clearly to where Tara had gone or who she might have been with. Weeks passed, then months. It was as if she had been gently folded out of reality, leaving behind questions that made even the toughest officers lose sleep. Detective Caleb Rourke, a quiet man who rarely expressed frustration, had become obsessed with the timeline of her last known movements. He carried her file almost everywhere, even taking it home sometimes when he knew he shouldn't. He replayed her final confirmed steps in his mind every night before sleep, leaving the daycare at 5:17 p.m., stopping at a gas station for a small cup of coffee, smiling politely at a teenage cashier, and then merging onto County Road 18 in her blue '97 Honda. After that, the trail abruptly stopped. The car was found the next morning on a back road leading toward the wooded edge of Crow Wing County, empty, unlocked, with Tara's purse still on the passenger seat as if she had stepped out for only a moment. But she never came back. What haunted Caleb the most was the faint scent of vanilla inside the vehicle. Tara wore a vanilla-scented lotion every day, and its soft smell lingered like a quiet goodbye. But detectives also found one more scent in the car: cigarette smoke. Tara didn't smoke. Her parents didn't smoke. None of her coworkers smoked. It was the single detail that refused to fade, the one that whispered that someone else had been inside her car shortly before she vanished. At the time, DNA testing was nowhere near what it would become decades later, and although investigators collected every hair, fiber, and trace from that Honda, they simply couldn't isolate anyone. Then came October 2001, the day a hunter walking through the thick woods northwest of Baxter found a shoe half buried beneath a fallen branch. It was a small, light blue sneaker with a loose shoelace, one Tara had been wearing the day she disappeared. Search teams poured into the woods for 2 days, combing through the wild brush until they discovered scattered remains beside a patch of tall grass. The county medical examiner confirmed what everyone feared. Tara had been found and the cause of death was listed as undetermined, though evidence strongly suggested she had been harmed by someone. The town changed that night. Porch lights that had always been left off were suddenly kept glowing until morning. Mothers kept their children inside. The silence of Minnesota's rural stillness suddenly felt like a warning, not a comfort. Detectives chased every lead they could gather. Early suspicion focused on Dennis Hartwell, a soft-spoken high school janitor who had been seen in the general area on the night Tara vanished. Dennis lived alone, rarely spoke to anyone, and had an odd habit of standing outside the grocery store watching people come and go without ever shopping. When deputies brought him in for questioning, he fidgeted with his keys and avoided eye contact, but he insisted he had nothing to do with Tara's disappearance. He claimed he had been fixing a leak under his trailer home that night. The alibi was weak, but officers found no evidence tying him to the crime. He was released. Months later, attention shifted to Harold Brinks, Tara's former neighbor who had quietly left town shortly after her remains were found. Harold had been known for his short temper and unpredictable mood swings. When detectives tracked him down in Wisconsin, he insisted he barely knew Tara and only moved because he wanted a fresh start. Again, nothing directly connected him to the case. He was crossed off the list reluctantly, but the suspicion around him lingered for years. As more time passed, the case slowly turned cold. Files were boxed. Photos began to fade. Even the detectives who once promised Tara's parents they would never stop searching eventually retired one by one. But the mystery never left Baxter. Every resident kept the story close to their chest as if solving it had become a personal duty. Each year, local reporters revisited it, calling it Minnesota's Quiet Heartbreak, a case that felt solvable but remained trapped by the limits of early forensic science. Everything changed in 2018, when the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension announced a statewide initiative to re-examine old evidence with modern DNA methods. It was the breakthrough Tara's case had needed for 17 long years. The small cigarette butt retrieved from the back floor of Tara's Honda, an item that had once been considered useless, was now entered into the newest version of CODIS, the National DNA Database. But when detectives excitedly awaited a match, the computer returned nothing. Whoever had smoked that cigarette was not in any criminal database. That moment crushed the team at first, but then a new idea emerged, one that would twist the case in a direction no one had expected. Forensic genealogy was now being used across the country to identify suspects previously thought untraceable. Detectives sent the unknown DNA profile to a private lab specializing in building family trees through public genealogy data. It was a long shot, one filled with ethical debates and uncertain results, but Tara's parents agreed without hesitation. Anything was better than silence. Months passed before the phone call came. A genealogist who had spent weeks studying thousands of data points had identified a connection, a surprising connection, to a well-known family in southern Minnesota. The match was distant, maybe third cousin level, but the genealogist was certain the suspect belonged somewhere within that sprawling family network. When detectives narrowed it down to the only male descendant in the right age range who had been within 50 miles of Baxter in 2001, the name shocked everyone. It wasn't an outsider. It wasn't a drifter or a neighbor with a temper. It was Noah Braden, a former volunteer firefighter admired for his calm nature, someone who had been thanked publicly for helping search for Tara during the early stages of the case. He had been part of the rescue teams. People remembered seeing him pass out water bottles. He had comforted Tara's aunt the night the car was found. The thought that he could be involved felt physically impossible, twisted in a way that made detectives question their own memories of the town. When investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a detail the town had completely overlooked. In 2001, Noah had been a heavy smoker. He quit 2 years later, which explained why no one in the community remembered him that way anymore. That one forgotten habit, the cigarettes, connected him to Tara's car like a whisper resurfacing from the past. Detectives quietly placed Noah under surveillance. They watched his routines, observed his interactions, monitored his online activity. In 2021, after collecting enough covertly obtained DNA from a discarded coffee cup, the lab returned the confirmation. The genetic profile matched the cigarette butt from Tara's Honda with absolute certainty. The same man who had helped search for her had been inside her car that night. But what the investigators didn't expect was the emotional storm about to hit the town. People who once trusted Noah began questioning everything they thought they knew. Parents wondered how close he had been to their kids at community events. Old conversations were replayed in their minds, and suddenly, harmless memories turned sinister without warning. The twist didn't end there. Two retired firefighters came forward to reveal something they had kept quiet for almost 20 years. Noah had unexpectedly disappeared from the search grid for nearly 40 minutes on the night they combed the woods after finding Tara's abandoned Honda. At the time, they thought he had just wandered too far ahead. Now, it seemed like those 40 minutes were the key to everything. Noah had returned from that gap sweating, shaking slightly, and insisting they move to another section of the woods. That moment, buried and forgotten, now surged forward like a tidal wave. It was enough for detectives to move in. The arrest, when it finally came, would shake Minnesota to its core. But the story was nowhere near over. The truth behind Tara's final moments was only just beginning to come to light, and the emotional blow waiting for her family would be something no one in the town saw coming. The arrest of Noah Braden in early 2022 sent shockwaves through Baxter and beyond. Neighbors who once waved to him on quiet Sunday mornings could not believe the calm, helpful man they knew was capable of such a crime. News crews flocked to the small town, but the community largely refused to comment on camera. Inside the police station, detectives prepared the charges meticulously. Noah was informed of the match to the DNA collected from Tara's car nearly 21 years earlier. His face remained eerily blank. No tears, no flinching, nothing that gave any clue to what he might say next. Inside the interrogation room, the air felt heavy. Detective Caleb Rourke, who had never stopped thinking about Tara, sat across from Noah, placing the evidence photo after photo on the table. The cigarette butt, Tara's belongings, the timeline of his movements that night, and the confession from retired firefighters all stared back at him in silence. Noah leaned forward and finally spoke, his voice low, almost regretful, admitting to a series of impulsive actions he claimed he could not explain. The words were chilling because they confirmed everything the DNA had suggested. Tara's parents, listening through a one-way mirror, felt a mix of vindication and unimaginable grief. Finally, they had answers, but the depth of betrayal was suffocating. What made the revelation even more shocking was Noah's motive, or rather, the absence of a clear one. He did not appear to know Tara personally, beyond passing her in the neighborhood and volunteering during the search. Investigators believed it had been an opportunistic act triggered by a moment of dark impulse, a fleeting decision that changed many lives forever. That sense of randomness made it all the more terrifying to the community. There was no pattern, no warning, no logic. A man who had once been seen as trustworthy had, in an instant, become a symbol of danger hidden behind the ordinary. In the weeks that followed, detectives pieced together the timeline of the fateful night with unprecedented clarity. The gap of 40 minutes during the initial search had been Noah's chance to remove Tara from the vicinity of her car, and forensic analysis suggested he had transported her body in his own vehicle before leaving it hidden in the woods where it was later discovered. Investigators also discovered items in his storage unit that suggested he had tried to conceal evidence over the years. Clothes stained with fibers matching Tara's, a small container with soil from the location where her body was found, and a journal with cryptic entries that, while not fully explaining his actions, painted a disturbing picture of obsession and secretiveness. Every detail uncovered added weight to the case and confirmed the fears that had quietly lingered in the community for 2 decades. The trial, which began in late 2022, became a tense, emotional spectacle. Survivors, friends, and family of Tara were present in every session, bearing witness to years of unanswered questions being replaced with undeniable facts. The prosecution carefully laid out the DNA evidence, the confession, the surveillance records, and the corroborating testimonies of retired first responders who had observed Noah's suspicious behavior during the original search. Each exhibit and testimony reinforced the picture of a man who had hidden in plain sight for years. Witnesses described the pain of living under the shadow of uncertainty, how every holiday, birthday, and community event carried echoes of Tara's absence. The courtroom was quiet when they recounted the most personal memories, the small details that made Tara so real and loved, the details that made her loss so palpable. The defense attempted to challenge the validity of genealogy DNA testing, arguing that the distant family matches were speculative and that the evidence was circumstantial. They tried to cast doubt on the retired firefighters' testimonies, claiming that memories from 20 years ago could not be reliable. But the jury was presented with an overwhelming body of modern forensic evidence. Most importantly, the definitive DNA link between Noah and the cigarette butt in Tara's Honda. Experts explained the process step by step, showing how the profile had been matched with an extraordinary level of certainty, and how nothing could reasonably account for its presence other than Noah's involvement. The scientific weight of the evidence, combined with the physical proof recovered from his storage unit and the corroborated timeline, left little room for doubt. During the trial, the town of Baxter grappled with mixed emotions. On one hand, there was relief that justice had finally been served. On the other, there was heartbreak and a lingering sense of betrayal. People walked down the streets wondering if they had missed something obvious, if there had been signs they overlooked. Old friends who once trusted Noah now avoided him, fearful of confronting the reality that he had lived among them unnoticed for so long. Psychologists later commented on the community trauma, describing it as the complex aftermath of discovering that evil had lived hidden behind familiar faces, and the challenge of reconciling years of perceived safety with the brutal truth. One of the most painful aspects for Tara's family was learning about the details of her final moments. While they had known she had been found in the woods, they did not know until the trial how Noah had manipulated the search and concealed her body, leaving the family in agonizing suspense for years. Each revelation was like reopening a wound, but it also confirmed that nothing they had imagined was worse than the reality. Detective Caleb Rourke, who had been tirelessly dedicated to the case, offered a quiet form of solace, emphasizing that while they could not undo the past, they had now created a permanent record of truth. Tara would not be forgotten, and Noah would be held accountable. When the verdict finally came, the courtroom fell silent, guilty on all counts. The judge pronounced the sentence with measured gravity, ensuring that Noah would spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was a justice long delayed but complete, a resolution that could finally allow Tara's parents, siblings, and friends to begin rebuilding their lives without the constant shadow of uncertainty. As they left the courthouse, tears fell freely, mixing sorrow with relief, grief with a sense of closure. For the first time in 21 years, they could breathe. Even after the trial, the story of Tara Lundell continued to resonate in Baxter. Local schools implemented programs to raise awareness about safety and community vigilance. News outlets featured special segments that highlighted the evolution of forensic science, showing how tools like DNA and genealogy could give answers where once there were only questions. Law enforcement agencies across Minnesota cited the case as an example of persistence, patience, and the power of modern investigative methods. Detective Rourke, reflecting on the case, noted that while some criminals could hide for years, the combination of science, community cooperation, and relentless pursuit of truth could eventually catch even the most elusive offenders. The final twist, however, came quietly and almost imperceptibly. In reviewing Noah's digital footprint during the investigation, authorities discovered cryptic messages he had sent in the early 2000s to a former coworker, messages he had deleted and forgotten. While they did not reveal new victims or crimes, they hinted at an internal struggle, a recognition of his own impulses, and a desire to escape them. Psychologists consulted on the case said that this revealed the terrifying duality of human nature, the calm exterior concealing a dangerous inner world, capable of destruction yet unrecognized until the consequences became tragically real. Baxter slowly returned to its quiet rhythms after the trial, but the story of Tara's disappearance and the shocking revelation of Noah Braden's guilt remained etched in memory. Her parents established a foundation in her name, dedicated to helping families cope with missing persons cases and funding cold case investigations. The community learned, painfully but irrevocably, that closure could arrive decades later, and that the smallest overlooked detail, a cigarette butt, a fleeting memory, a gap in a search, could become the key to justice. As the town moved forward, the echo of Tara's life and the lessons from her tragic story lingered. It was a reminder that ordinary days, friendly neighbors, and peaceful routines could hold secrets unimaginable, that perseverance in science could unearth hidden truths, and that even after 21 years, justice could arrive to calm the storm of grief and uncertainty. Baxter had endured a nightmare, but through unwavering dedication and modern forensic breakthroughs, the town, at last, found closure.